let's actually take a minute to get some feedback on this. So, just to build on that, so Stephen, what we heard you say was, I want the ability to interact with Storytel in very like simple, easy to access ways. And so this is a modification to the first screen that Ricardo showed at the top, where you might still have a list of all your smart chats like he was showing, but you have a persistent dialog box. And whatever level you're at in a collection, you can be talking to all the files in that. So let's imagine I'm at a top level here. It says all Paramount knowledge. So Barrier, let's imagine this is a top level with all of the content that anyone's uploaded, or I could go down into a sub collection and be there with just those files. I can see all of the conversations that have happened, but I always have the ability to ask a question. And Stephen, I just want to address that part first, and then we'll talk about this.
Yeah. So at a high level, I think that's what I want. Like it basically, so like on the left-hand side, I'd have a customers collection, then a collection for each customer. I can chat with the group. I could chat with the customers. Any individual one, life is good. Um, for the smart chat window there, when I open it for a collection, part of me goes, is that persistent or is it unique to my chat? So like if I go away and I come back 2 days later, is it going to have a message history? Um, I
Hey,
know currently
hey,
on
hey,
the
Ricardo.
old version it does, but I have mixed feelings on that.
I don't know, Ricardo, how quickly you can kind of work in real time here, but could you maybe just go back up to the top one for a second and let's look at that together? I'm going to take a right. So here, there's a list of the smart chats that are a part of this collection. Really, what we're adding, and I'll just try to draw it, is a persistent prompt bar here. And I could start a new smart chat at any time. When I
Cool.
started, yeah,
So if I start chatting there, it's just going to make a new chat. If I want to open an
that's
old
right.
chat, I can open an old chat.
That's exact. Yep.
That
So
sounds great.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. In fact, Ricardo. Yeah. Thank you, Ricardo, for the real time. This now we're jamming together. This is
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, yep. 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 So
Um, and and then I also had a comment on the insights.
great. Okay. Go ahead. Yes, please.
So I'm not sure how you guys are planning to auto-generate insights, but you may recall a long time ago we talked about that whole smart tiles concept of being able to put in standard questions I want to ask that anytime I open the thing, they show up.
Yep.
Um, be surfacing those the way play in the spot you currently have insights, I like as an idea.
Ricardo, can you pull up the dynamic smart chat mocks that you've done, and let's try to stitch this all together in a way that makes sense to all of us who aren't in it every day.
Yep.
I think it might be on a different, well, you probably know better than I do where it lives. But so Stephen, while Ricardo's grabbing that, yeah, great. While he's grabbing that, the idea is that we have this thing that sometimes we call insights, sometimes we call dynamic smart chats. The idea would be that there's a bunch of insights. One of the types could be a dynamic smart chat. Think of that as a persistent prompt. So I can ask a question, like here I'm asking a question, or here I'm asking a question, and then there's an answer to that question. So Storytel is giving me an answer. Every
Perfect.
time a new piece of content is added into this collection, the answer auto updates. So we can see it auto updated 4 hours ago. I can see a history of it. And also, Ricardo, I know that we had a spot where we were showing how I can get alerted. So I could say, like, every time the answer updates, I want sales to be alerted, or I want this email address to be alerted, or I want it to push out to a Slack channel. So that's another great,
Cool.
Ricardo's going to show that. So I can create it and I can say, notify me whenever, or notify sales whenever the answer changes. Is that
Cool.
the thing that you're talking about, Stephen?
That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Okay.
And um, I think there's two different ways I want that to be able to define those questions. Actually, there's two different axes that are interesting. So I want to be able to define those questions inside a collection, but I also want to be able to define them at a parent and tell them when I define them, trickle this to each of my children, actually put this on each of my children, not on me, so that I can if you think about, for those who don't know, I'm a product manager. All my customer calls go into Storytel, and I do a whole bunch of analysis of them there. So I have effectively a collection on the old Storytel version, for every customer, and then I've got one for all customers. Um, so what I want to be able to do is on my all customers, I can define the set of questions that anytime I open any customer, I want to see there. And then if
So
I have something customer specific, I can add that to the customer specific collection.
can we try to just like map this out with you to make sure that we understand it? First of all, who wants to try to paraphrase what Stephen just asked for? Does anybody feel like they have enough clarity to describe it? And Ricardo, thank you. I love this like real time jamming. This is so good. Who wants to try to describe what Stephen just asked for?
Steven, I'm not sure I completely understood, but when you go to the all customers, you want to be able to have some of these predefined smart chats that are for particular customers, but it's like an overview page where you get data pushed to you.
Yeah, kind of. So like
Let's set
let me give you a very specific example using what's on the screen.
Stephen really quick to get on the same page. Let's imagine that we are at a top level collection right now. I know it doesn't show it, but let's imagine that we're at a top level collection. So imagine that we're
You're breaking up, by the way, Drodio. At least for me.
Yeah, for me too.
Okay.
sorry. Go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So if I look at the text here, what I'm basically saying I want is like if we were looking at this research collection, I believe what was being pitched for insights is on the research collection, I can define items that show up here. What I was saying is I also want to be able to go into the activities databases collection and define a set of questions that show up on research and ideation and prioritization and delivery, so that if I'm doing categorization of things and all of these things represent similar things. So in my case, they're customer names. And I have a standard set of questions I want to easily see as insights on each customer. I can define that once. I can maintain that list in one place. And anytime I open any customer, anything that's in the child of my customers layer, I always see that same set of questions. That's what I was describing.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a template, but one that's applied automatically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, basically it's being able to scope the template so that rather than having a template always be tied to one of these, I can make a template that applies to a set of them.
Yep.
Okay, I'm pushing my computer too hard because I got too excited about this feedback. So I missed what Stephen said. Who can paraphrase what Stephen said so that we make sure that we understand it?
I think I got it this time. So if we imagine that activities database is customers, and under activities database, we have a collection for each customer. What Stephen would like is to have a predefined set of questions or insights that he wants to be able to apply to the whole set of customers, so that anytime he goes into like research, which would be customer 1, or ideation, which would be customer 2, he would have the exact same set of predefined questions for each one of them appear on each collection.
And it's just based on the data that is in that collection. So the answer gets answered differently based on the data of the collection. That's a really good idea. I don't know if we would have thought about that until like a month from now. Okay. And so, good.
So the next is you mentioned also being able to automatically send notifications off of these. So if you think about what I just described wanting, want one other thing related to that, which is if I've defined the question at this parent and it's being asked for each of these children, and I'm sending it to a destination, I want to be able to override just the destination, but not the question
The
on
child.
a per child basis. Why? So that the stakeholder map questions go to my stakeholder map email list or webhook, and my
Mhm.
user observation go to my user observation email list or webhook.
Okay, so let's just try to do a really quick and dirty how this might look. When I make a new dynamic smart chat, let's imagine I'm at the top level and I make a new one and I ask the question. I also have some options. One option might say, also have this show up for children, and then it would show up in all of these. The answers would be different. I can also go into those children and I can edit it and I can say, have it be sent to this destination instead of that one. And that's overriding the parent. So I think that's my first thought about how we could do what Steven is asking for. There's probably better ideas, but maybe that's a jumping off point.
Who's the parent, Stephen? Is that like are you going to get it, or are you sending it directly to your client?
So, in my case, the places I send these to today, that basically the features that I'm going this would replace that are in the old Smart Chat product. I'm sending them to our internal customer tracking database. I'm also sending them to internal Slack channels that are shared between like the CSM team, the sales team, product management, and support.
I think it looks like this, right? I've got like all my customers, and then I've got customer one, customer two. And so Bears and Nick, just to imagine ways that this could be useful for you and see if you think it would be. So Bears, you might have a question, you might have a collection for all BET shows, and you're asking a question like, what is the sentiment about these shows? And you're asking that at the top level here. So when you ask it at the top level, the answer comes back, what is the sentiment on BET? The answer comes back for all the content that is in Storytel. But you could also say, I want that same question to be asked at these child levels. And maybe this is Sistas and this is Darren, Detroit,
Yeah.
etc. And so then the answer is specific to just the content that's in those. And you might say, well, I want different people to be alerted every time the answer changes at those sub levels.
Yeah.
Would that be valuable
Yeah,
for you like it is for
yeah,
Stephen?
that would be very valuable. But I do have one question. Because we're doing a lot of like qualitative testing, Drodio. So for Sisters, for example, right? We'll do qualitative tests before every season. And when we do ask questions, we don't always want to ask the same questions to season one versus season two, or tranche one versus tranche two, because what's happening in the industry changes. So do you need to create another sub layer, or can we just say focus on season one and that it'll know this to focus on season one?
Okay, who's
So I
got an
think
answer?
what at least what I was pitching is that when you set up one of these insights, you can tell it, does this ask at the layer I'm defining it at, or does it ask at every layer below me? At which point the questions you want to ask of every season, you define them on the parent layer, and you say, ask this of every season, ask it of the layers below me. But for a season specific question, you'd open that particular season, and then you would put in the question, say, ask at this layer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Bears, so I think there's also two ways that I would think that we could slice this. You can have an unlimited number of collections. So you could have one that says all shows and then specific shows. You could have another top one that's all seasons and then it has specific seasons. I mean, you could look at this in different ways. You could potentially
Yeah.
slice it in different ways. What I think I also hear you asking is something we've heard from a lot of users, which is I want a temporal nature to the questions that I'm asking. And I want to be able to define, maybe I only want recent data, maybe I want older data. Stephen,
Yeah.
you've asked for this in different ways as well. We haven't done anything with that yet, but I can also imagine like time sliders or the ability to define time windows. I just wonder maybe what you would ask for around that with this structure.
Part of me also thinks that a lot of the time filtering can be handled via the questions if we get the right data to the LLM. So, like, as an example, I have more than a few times articulated wanting to be able to ask a question about, like, according to the last customer meeting. This is not a concept that the LLM understands currently. So, like, if I say summarize the last customer meeting, the LLM will summarize all the content available to it. But hey, my file names and my files all have transaction dates. So I suspect it is possible to explain to the LLM that these are meetings and to give them the dates of each. So I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, it's interesting to do a time slider and go only look at files that were uploaded in the last, 10 minutes, or to trigger an automated notification that looks at only the new piece of content. But then sooner or later, I want to add content that isn't the normal thing I upload regularly, and it does the wrong thing. So I kind of feel like for a lot of those use cases, figuring out what information needs to get into the semantic model such that I can interact with it naturally through my question may be an even more powerful thing. And it might be a matter of like, cool, it's phases and there's both, but I kind of feel like the holy grail is the time filter just comes from my questions. You know, if I want to ask a question about season 2 versus season 1, and the files I uploaded has season 2 in the file name, like maybe there just needs to be a way for it to easily go, these are season 2.
So I'm going to make a really quick sub video here for the backend team, because when I hear you say that, Stephen, what I imagine is that as we're creating these story tiles, which are these, smaller atomic units of the source data,
Yeah.
in the metadata, putting information about the timestamps of that source data so that we can then use that in to be able to do the types of things that you're doing. That probably feels like a more elegant way to approach it.
Yeah. So I also think there's like related to that, like I could totally see on research, or on like my customers collection, or uh, Burge's shows collection, having a setting where I can say my child collections represent show names or shows. These are terms that represent to that the terms that are my child's collections. At which point, like, cool, the LLM suddenly can be told, this name of the collection is a show. These are the files that pertain to that show. And suddenly, if I ask a question like, what's the most popular show? The LLM knows that, this particular thing is actually a show name, even if it's not in the file I uploaded, because it got it through the categorization I added. And one of the things I think the old smart chat's missing is there isn't a way to connect the categorization back to the content. It's like if I reference a customer, if I have a file about that customer, but their name isn't actually in the file, the LLM won't, like if I'm chatting with multiple customers, the LLM won't realize that that's related because it's not looking at the categorization too.
Right. It has no visibility into what you've named the tag effectively. Right. Okay.
Or like, what does like the tag is a customer? It has no way of knowing that.
Yep. Okay. I know that I think we're technically at time. We have more things that we wanted to show, and I just wanted to do a time check here. So do you all have a bit more time, or do you have hard stops, or who's got what going on?
I have to jump, Brody. I'm sorry, I have another meeting.
No, it's okay, Bears. Thank you so much. And we'd
Thank
love
you.
to do a sub call just with you, Bears, if you got more specific feedback here.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Graham, do you want to show some statics, or Andy, would you like Ricardo to go deeper on any Figma, or where would you all like to take it, team?
I have some very narrow and specific questions about the sidebar that I'd like to ask. The first one is, yeah, Ricardo, thanks. If you can stay zoomed in on one of the sidebars. We have these categories that we kind of decided on, but I'm curious if first of all, these make sense just at a glance to everyone, what they are, and if there's any feedback on them being useful or confusing.
I have a thought, but curious, Nick and Steven, if y'all have something first.
I'm not sure that global, starred, and shared need to be separate sections. Like maybe actually what I almost want is I almost want global to be part of shared. Like, hey, if it's global, it's shared. But then if you think about Slack, I can go in and I can move anything that's a public Slack channel to a separate group. And I can manage my and so, starred is a separate group, but like I have a separate group that is all of my product related Slack channels. I think being able to do something similar to that would be very useful because I can see this list getting very, very large, and shared and global potentially getting very, very large. Um, and I go, okay, cool. You make there be shared, you make there be private, and then anything I can basically go and move to a custom grouping, and starring is just a custom grouping, just like it is with Slack.
One question, and we didn't really go into this, but the collections themselves can be used as kind of like groupings as well, in a sense, where on the sidebar you can close them and open them up and see the ones underneath them. Is that, would you say that's good enough as a grouping, or does the visual distinction make it much clearer?
I think I want both. And I think I want both
Okay.
because I'm going to use them for different classes of categorization. Like there's knowledge categorization, and then there's like conversational categorization.
Mhm.
And my suspicion, and it might be wrong, is that if I only have one way to do it, I'm going to wind up like the knowledge categorization is not optional, and it's going to result in me having places where I can't fit it into the categorization I want for like just finding the thing I want to chat with quickly because I need it there for some use case. Did that make sense?
I think so, yeah. And thank you for the feedback. It's not something we've thought about at all, so very helpful.
Andy, I find myself feeling that way every time I'm on one of these calls. So
Yep.
there's nothing like learning from users. Stephen, one thing about global versus shared to get your feedback on, we think it's true that only certain types of users should be able to publish collections out to the entire company. Let's imagine it's like all of Harness or all of Paramount. And so we have this idea that like if I'm an admin, I can create a global collection. Like let's say it's like all hands and we want to create a collection around that. But it would be noisy if anybody can do that. That's why we're distinguishing between these two. What are your thoughts about that?
So I agree that you want that ability, but I'm not sure you need to distinguish between them from a view standpoint. So like if I go back to Slack, I can have a Slack channel that's visible only to me. I can have a Slack channel that is visible company wide. I can have a shared invite only Slack channel. They're all one list.
And so it could just be a different like icon on it if it's global versus
Yeah. And I like one of the things Slack does really, really well, in my opinion, relative to like the other IMs, is it does a really, really good job, in my opinion, of like channel management. And it does it all in one namespace, but it's got all of these security levels. And most of the time, what I care about is finding that conversation I'm looking for. And I care about that much more than I care about what security level. So I could see now another thing that it's got in there to make that usable that isn't on here currently that might be needed to scale to large numbers is the concept of joining a shared conversation. If I have 1,000 shared conversations I have access to, and or global company-wide conversations or pieces of knowledge, um, being able to join just the ones that I want and having a browser for everything versus what I've said interests me is probably interesting as well.
Mhm.
I think this is, yeah, I love using the UIs we love as a base, because I'm also thinking, you know, a lot of this thinking came from Google Drive, and I'm thinking about that too. I think I'm seeing a difference between Slack and dealing with data. I mean, for sure, like, oh, I'm just messaging with you, Stephen. It's really important for me to know that, versus with the company at large. And I've what I've experienced today with, you know, a lot of different levels of tech savviness and UI challenges in our Gen 1, is a lot of feelings about who is this shared with, and wanting it to be like insanely clear in all ways at a glance. So just lots of, you know, siloing by design, and fear of things leaking. And so yeah, I'm not here to say what feature is built. You know, I think we're really excited to get your input on that. And I think the job to be done is just like clarity about access.
Yeah. Well, and you know, there might be a different thing for like things I manage versus things that I use
Mhm.
even. But like in general, I find Google Drive navigation within a drive is reasonable. But the instant you're going between your private drive, your company global drive, or any of the various departmental drives, usability very quickly drops.
Mhm. Right.
One of the reasons I was going to Slack is it manages that level of of categorization. It doesn't do it with a folder structure. It's flat conversations, which is a little bit different.
Right.
With good visibility into the security, as well as, you know, actually managing to scale to very, very large numbers of things. And I think what worries me with the current mock UI is that it's not going to scale to, you know, thousands of things
Right.
and still be user friendly.
One of the things I'm thinking about there, Stephen, is the whole idea of perhaps what we're looking at right now is almost like an opt-out UI, whereas in my mind, Slack is very much this opt-in idea. So there, you know, I can go and quickly find something that I want to add to my UI, and I can remove it, but there's always that kind of global space. So it's very much a kind of opt-in experience. So you're seeing the things you want to see and the things you've got access to see as well, as opposed to just listing everything and you having to kind of manage it with folders and manage it with different categories.
Yeah. Well, I'd actually say Slack is both an opt-in and an opt-out, because the Slack admins, there is a setting for what channels everyone in the company is added to by default initially. So like when I start as a new employee, like I automatically have like the company-wide general channel and announcements channel and like 4 others. Then I can browse and opt into channels, and hey, there's thousands of channels. But then I can also go and add anyone to a channel that I think they care about. And then they can remove themselves if I'm wrong. So like I think it actually is both. And I think that's one of the things that's really powerful about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
So, I mean, I think we're structurally set up to be able to do something very similar, right? We can add people in. I don't know if we've really talked about people removing themselves out, but, you know, obviously it'd just be the universe of adding them in. So it sounds powerful the way that Stephen is talking about the value of that. It feels like we're well set up to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's like 2 different sides of it, because there's like the permission side and then there's the what I actually care about side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not all Slack channels are public.
Stephen, is what Ricardo's doing here more like what you would want to see? I just taking out global.
Yeah. Yeah, like just putting them all in a shared space. versus private space, and then like let me, go and move them into custom categories.
Mhm.
Let me subscribe to them. Let me say I don't care about this one. Remove me from it.
Mhm. Okay.
Like,
And then would we move private into that as well? And it's just by icon that's letting us know what the access is.
I think it's reasonable to.
Let's talk about icons for a second. So I think it's true that we at some point want to make it possible for users to pick their own icons. I don't know if that's an MVP thing. I'm assuming it's not. Right. So it's not. And so we just would need to, I think, in that case, decide if we are using icons to define access or if users can create their own icons. I know that with the system Bear, Aaron was mentioning that he really likes how Bear allows for different icons that are more contextual.
I think one of the goals was to have the LLM almost pick an icon. So if you created a marketing collection, for example, then it would find a suitable icon for the marketing collection. I think that's part of where the thinking was. But you're right, as soon as we start actually using the icons for symbolism, the meaning of that changes.
So
You
there
know,
was a company I worked at a long time ago that had two icons for everything. It had a primary icon and an overlay icon. And we used overlays for things like add or remove. Um, and it was basically a mini icon in a corner. And that mini icon in the corner was like standard verbs we had. But the icon it was overlaid on top of was like visually communicating what the entity it was modifying was. I could see doing something similar where like you have an overlay icon for private, shared, public. And they get overlaid, in in like the bottom left corner on top of a bigger icon that is LLM generated and communicates the concept of a customer or communicates the concept of a show. Kind of frightened to wonder what the icon for a show is, but probably a TV. Um,
I just dropped into Zoom chat what Aaron had observed. I don't know if you are able to just click on that to show it. And then Erica, looks like you've got some feedback on that.
Yeah, I see pretty, I love not everything has to come from users and I love when it does. And so I just haven't heard anyone have a need around this. I'm sure we can do more surveying besides on this call. I see pretty massive challenges around onboarding. If every company has different icons, both for how we're, demoing our product. It's just, if it has different icons, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't map.
Well, let's take that to talk more about it. So Andy and UI UX team, it sounds like an important thing for us to discuss more. I do just want to confirm what I understand you saying, Stephen. I think what I'm imagining is like some larger icon. So I'm going to draw a really crappy kind of like larger icon like this is unlocked as if it's shared. And then some like sub icon that is like the icon of the actual thing. Is that what you mean?
yeah, I'll see if I can find an example and share it out via Slack for you as well. But like I could see, and actually really quickly to yes and what Eric is saying, I also think there's a lot of things guys should build before this. I think it's a cool feature. I think it's potentially moderately useful, but I think there's a lot of more useful things you can do first. But like, hey, that bear category. Imagine if that bear had is private. I could see it's a bear circle, and in the lower left of the bear, there's a very small lock icon. Now, if you're doing that, you suddenly need to have a bigger primary icon, at which point it takes up more screen real estate. That's the downside.
Right. So you're describing something like that. Well, I think in terms of today, the things that we have to figure out is just whether or not we are going to try to communicate status through icons, like it is private, it is shared, it is global. And that can be a or a no.
Mm-hmm.
Or alternately via something like like a border line type. I could see doing it like color. I wanted to say color, but then you have colorblind concerns.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
But like it's three concepts. isn't enough different concepts to communicate that you need an icon, or at least a large icon.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, Ricardo, as a UI guru, I think is a good problem for you to tackle. So what is the simple way for us to show whether it's private, shared, or completely open to the company?
Yeah.
And should we use icons to do it?
And I think language, like,
Here's an example I'm pasting into chat, by the way, of overlaid icons.
awesome. Thank you, Stephen. I think in terms of language, if we do rest on language, the less I have to explain, like, what does global mean? What does shared mean? Like company-wide, I think that's really clear. But if I have to define everything, then our product isn't doing what it needs to do. Just me has been really clear to people, where that's the only thing from our alpha that seems like it's been clear. I think only my org people don't know what that means, and anyone with a link also same.
I hear you plus wanting Stephen asking to simplify and strike out global and,
Mhm.
and even simplify more to not have shared versus private and be able to explain that in us. That, am I getting that right?
Yeah, not using the word global.
Yeah, I
No.
could almost see like it's like you just see them all in the list on the left-hand nav. When you open one at the top, there's a spot where it tells you how many other users have access to it, or private or public. If it's public, everyone in your company has access. And if if it's shared, it tells me how many users have been granted access. I can click, I can see the usernames. If it's private, like, cool, it's just me. And what I just described is, again, the paradigm Slack follows.
Yeah, and I think we've got something like that. It looks like Andy, you're pulling up. Like, I hear you talking about something like this, Stephen. Is that accurate? Actually, Andy, can you zoom back out for a second? So on the top right over here, does that give
I
you?
don't think I can see where you are trying to circle.
Andy's got to go here. This right
There
here.
we go.
Is this the kind of thing that you need?
Yeah, that sort of thing. So cool. You don't tell me if it's public or private or shared in the left-hand nav, but when I open it, you tell me in the top right there.
Great. So
Yep.
this could have a, just me type of lock on it if it's not shared with anybody, or it could shared with, or it could say, entire company or some sort of an icon for everybody.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So then Andy or Graham, and I think maybe we lost Ricardo, but if we were to not have shared, not have global, not have private, and just be using the top right to indicate.
Yeah.
Andy, what other questions do you have? You said you had a couple questions.
I actually forgot, but this has been helpful because I did have the feeling that it was a bit too complicated because even I got a bit confused by global and shared. So it was good to have that discussion. Thanks.
Yeah. So something I hate about the old project that I'm going to say, the old product, since we're working on the security model, is in general, like, I have private, I've got company wide. Like, being able to do shared for individual people is good. Being able to do visible outside of my own company, like, this is a very special thing that I may or may not even be able to do. Like, if I want to be able to do that with something, um, it required, like, the amount of security reviews I had to go through to use that product just skyrocketed. And I've had products that I've bought that, like, I'm allowed to use, but you have to turn off that feature in order to enable. Um, so, when I upload things, either everything's private and I have to expose it, but I would do that by channel, or everything's public within my org, and I can choose to make it private. And then the visibility for org versus private, like doing that by the channel grouping you were showing, I think makes a lot of sense, as opposed to doing it on every individual file.
I'll take total responsibility for pushing for the openness in the original product. We were hoping to be able to create viral loops by having it.
I get why it was done. Like, I think there's Yeah. And honestly, at that time, I don't think like there's potentially a consumer product, and for consumer, it makes a lot more sense than it does for B2B.
Okay, Nick, questions from you or thoughts from you as you listen to all this and look at all this?
Well, first of all, thanks for allowing me to join you folks. I think this was very helpful, especially Daniel, in context of what you had shared when we were together.
Mhm.
You had showed conceptual drawings.
Mhm.
I like the direction. I can certainly see. I liked it when you said it. It took a little while for it to sink in, which is the notion of call it a conclusive, like words, reading unstructured data and rendering a conclusion. It's better than a graph.
Mhm. Although it could also be a graph potentially, like we're just
Could
showing.
also be. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily need to be, the answer doesn't need to be limited to text as LLMs get more powerful.
Yeah, but to your point, they can actually live together. And then tracking the dialogue of parent and children, where my head went to was sort of company versus the salesperson's living in a company and then the customers living under a salesperson, and tying into, your ideas, dossiers. So I know for a fact we can sell that. That's unique in the market. It's layers of a competitive advantage for us, and happy to sort of dive in deeper. But I like
That's
the point.
Well, we'll talk more with you and John about ways to,
Yeah.
Bench team, I mentioned this morning that there's this guy named John who is taking Domo dashboards and layering Storytel on top of them. Nick is the one who introduced us to John, and John has been working with Nick to create a product that is based on Domo. And so Nick also has his clients where he's creating Domo dashboards for them that he would like to be able to have a Storytel layer that takes these kind of hard to understand Domo cards and tells a data-driven story around them. And so we'll get the chance to talk more with Nick and John about that.
Well, and
And
if you think about what we were discussing earlier for being able to define an item at research, and then its children all show me insights. Suddenly I have a data feed that's, a simple, CSV I can upload into my data warehouse that has the name of that question. It has all of the tags that question was run on, and it's got the current answer. And anytime they get regenerated, Storytel updates that in my data warehouse, and I can suddenly see those answers in my reports alongside the rest of my data.
mm-hmm.
And similarly, I can take that one step farther. I can craft a prompt that outputs a number.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, one of the questions that I regularly ask my data, how many of this unit of measure I use for pricing does my customer have? Answer in just a number. Cool. If I can get that prompt to where it gives me just a number, I can suddenly in my BI solution go and do the math on that to my pricing through my pricing model and do an instant quote
Mm-hmm.
as an example.
Yeah.
So I very much see potential for linking them. And I think we were talking earlier today on something you can use as a first stab of like feeding that structured data over.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Graham and Andy, in terms of this is where it gets really powerful to build this collaborative intelligence platform? You can build workflows around, you can query, etc.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay.